Good day, folks. This is Bob with BBD. Taking off on a conversation in one of our groups who's talking about, or really down on how the U.S. has left Afghanistan in turmoil and the really ill-planned and ill-executed evacuation. We don't forget the fact this is the largest evacuation, in history, almost of how long I can remember. Right? Then there's a lot of chatter. I got this article from Shishir Gupta, from somebody in the print. Then again, the whole narrative or the undertone of these articles is about how the US is not dependable ally and India must look after its own interests. But first, let me just point out, India must always look after its own interests, guys. Why should the United States look after our interests? I don't understand, Mr. Shishir Gupta, or anybody else who suggests that. Okay, it's really funny. Right? Why should the United States look after our interests? Is an important question for all these guys to answer. Right? We have to decide what our national interest is and make our moves accordingly. Right now, our national interest clearly suggests that China is clear and present danger. The equation between China and Pakistan is going to feed into Afghanistan and the Taliban. We need to protect ourselves against that. The best protection we have, irrespective of the evacuation, which, believe me, has not done anything as far as I think to the soft power of the United States or the technological prowess, to tell me that they are not a dependable partner, which seems to be the general narrative everywhere going on. What I find, however, is most of these guys, journalists, right, are our era journalists, right? Basically graduated from universities between 60 and now. What is the common thread, right? We are post partition guys, so we're really not that hung up on the traumas of partition. However, we come to 62, we were young, China and etc. 65, 71 is a big play in our mind. Hence, we think USSR through rosy tinted glasses because they came to our aid, and apparently that's why the USS Nimitz and the people who were Nixon and his crew had to go away, not realizing that Indira Gandhi herself had done a lot of work, and Manekshaw, between Indira Gandhi and Manekshaw, we had kicked the Pakistani butt. That was the reality. It had nothing to do with Russia, nothing to do with the United States of America, folks. That had to do it entirely to us, right? We did that. But why we continue to tend to just morass around this stupid non-alignment? That's what. So everything that comes out of the narrative that comes out of these newspapers from these guys, right? The guys who are older than me, is basically the same BS, which is driven by this non-alignment, 1971 USSR, not knowing that the USSR. You got to go look at the MI5, MI6. The files that they have on these the KGB moles, how they and when they spoke about how in what kind of words about India, right? But this is one thing I want to know. Lessons for India from Afghanistan routine. The important part, and it is by Swaminathan Shankaraya, US is an undependable ally. I'm not sure how he comes to that conclusion, because his main point is, historically, military superpowers translated their might into physical conquest of territories. Across the world, that was called an empire. So that is an empire. But what he makes is an important statement. The US is the first country to become a military superpower without territorial ambitions. Not only a military, but an economic superpower. No, it doesn't have territorial ambitions, right? Okay. Next, guess who has territorial ambitions at this point in time? China and Russia. Okay. Now, that's the important part to know. The US lacked the stamina to crush even tiny North Korea in the Korean War and exited with a status quo that any self-respecting colonial power would have called defeat. Now, it isn't a colonial power. And when he says stamina, for God's sakes, the United States got pulled into to World War I, got pulled into World War II. The miracles of both Germany and Japan have a lot to do with the defense umbrella provided by the United States, so they could spend all their money on economic development and technology. Right? So stamina, 20 years in Afghanistan, $1 trillion, and you call that no stamina, Mr. Swaminathan? But the point he makes is very important. That it's really technically not an empire, right? It's Pax Americana. Islamists and China are celebrating the US humiliation. They believe the 21st century belongs to them. Few believe the US will fight a protracted war if China attacks Japan, Korea or Taiwan. India should not believe that joining Biden's group of democracies or the new naval quad will provide us serious security. It must step up its own capabilities, especially software skills for cyber warfare and drone warfare. What I tell Swaminathan, this is all good on paper. But without the United States help, you're not going to get there. We are just asking for their leg up for a temporary basis, not on a permanent basis, right? Everybody thinks, so what are you going to do? Suddenly IITs are going to start churning out cyber warfare, which we've not been able to do since the Vedas. I mean, sometimes you got to have reality check, right? But what's happening elsewhere? Strong resolution on Taliban at UNSC, all eyes on China. US-backed draft resolution calls upon Taliban to allow safe and secure passage to Afghans with valid travel authorization from foreign countries. Draft resolution also demands that Afghan territory is not used to threaten, attack, shelter of or train terrorists. Draft resolution in its current form does not makes it clear that UNSC will continue to monitor the Taliban. Kabul trip on agenda as Shringla heads to the United States. EAM three-nation European trip to focus on Afghanistan, Indo-Pacific, China, and this includes one of the areas he goes to is Croatia, and he goes to, I think, Serbia, very important. India to flag Afghanistan concerns with Russia, China in September. Taliban reaches out to India, bat for trade via Pakistan. How many of you know, folks, that 50% of Afghanistan exports are to India? Without India, they are also going to have an extremely difficult time. Want ties with Delhi to continue as before, says senior leader. Taliban kill Afghan folk singer in Restiv province, says family. Afghans say Taliban's enemy is starting to disappear. Now, this is the ground reality, right? The extreme jihadi, which is different from the guys we are seeing out of Doha. Veteran Afghan strongmen to form new front for holding negotiations with Taliban. Humayun or Hanuman? What is in the name? Villagers differ. Now, this is the kind of stupidity that is going to have big problems in our domestic policies and our foreign policy. Want good India-Afghanistan relations, says Taliban leader. And this gentleman is Stanikazai, and he's number 3 in the Taliban, and he was in the, he's a graduate of the IMA. Important point here. US strike kills 2 ISK planners of Kabul bombing. Biden warns of fresh threat. PM, India helps its people wherever they are in trouble, which is true. Needs safe zones in Kabul, France, UK to tell UNSC. US drone blows up bomb-laden IS car headed for Kabul airport. World must positively guide Taliban, China tells the US. China is flying its wick in the wick in the air. Where is Taliban Supreme Leader Akhundzada? Now that's an important question. Taliban prepared to set up government as US evacuation nears end, mounting frustration in Kabul over economic hardships. Afghans protest cash shortage as talks for forming government continues. As troops reach searched Afghans, a bomber in crowd moved in. Not the last. Biden promises further strikes against ISIK. US starts troop withdrawals from Kabul, retaliates for airport blast. US blows up CIA base to keep intel out of reach of Taliban. Taliban largely seal off Kabul airport as airlift winds down. They don't want their Afghan intelligentsia to flee, right? First outreach signal, UNSC drops Taliban reference in line of terror, and it's important because India is the chair, right? So it's important that India is on board too. Afghanistan evacuation enters final phase. Taliban man roads to Kabul airport as US begins the pullout of troops, says they are ready to take control. Taliban prepared to set up a new Afghan government as economic crisis deepens. Troops to leave as UK ends rescue missions. Cheers. More later. So as you can see from the previous 2 tapes, right, we keep talking about not trusting the United States, doesn't make a good ally. That tape earlier, that's a guy who defected from the KGB to the Brits, who clearly tells you that you really can't trust the Russians either, right? And just to remember in this, the Kailash Hills giveaway was courtesy Sergei Lavrov. Whether the Indian government comes out to tell you that or not, whether the external affairs minister comes out to tell you that, it was Sergei Lavrov and his twisting. Similarly, just also remember it was Sergei Lavrov who had actually given us ironclad commitments and that the Chinese were not amassing their troops focusing on India and was only an exercise. And guess what happened next was, it was all for us to see. Right? So what you got to really worry about is the Russians and the Chinese and the Pakistani, now called the BRIC. Pakistan, Russia, Iran, China are absolutely exactly what they are, BRICS. They're not going to come to India's side, right? The only people who are going to be standing in your corner, they may not come and fight for you, which is not expected. After all, you are a country, you are a sovereign country, you've been a sovereign country. We pretend to be strong. We all want to look after our own. Everybody who comes out of the woodwork, we should be depending. Yeah, we've been saying that for the last 30 years. We should be depending on ourselves. But why don't we depend on ourselves? Because the inherent weakness in our character, the goddamn corruption in the polity and the bureaucracy, that is why India never gets to where it wants to go, right? So let's not blame the Americans for it. Let's not blame the world for it. Our problem is our own. Right now, the security problem is ours. We've got to tackle it. It is no point recriminating. And it's a hypocritical bunch of guys we have. With a throw of a hat, we want to rush off to Europe and America and all the Western countries. Right? And a lot of us, not all, and live there, send our kids there. Most of our kids have been educated there. But we continue to beat up on the United States. I can't figure this out. I cannot figure this hypocrisy out in our intelligentsia, in our Lutyens, Delhi, in our crowd of the guys who graduated in college, who were born in the 50s and the 60s. Folks, let's grow up. Let's smell the coffee. Let's not be too hard on the United States. They're pretty hard on themselves anyway. If you see their TVs these days, right? Let's just focus on our economy. Let's just focus on UP and hopefully that this damn government will not create divisive politics that will have impinge our foreign policy. Jai Hind.
इसका कोई ना कोई हल होना चाहिए। चीमा साहब, जितना शोर पाकिस्तान ने मचाया फलस्तीन के लिए, उतना किसी और इस्लामिक कंट्री को हमने नहीं देखा कि वो आगे आई हो और या उसने बात की हो। यहाँ पे तो आम लोग भी आपको पता है प्रोटेस्ट कर रहे हैं, सब कुछ है। लेकिन एक चीज मुझे बताइए कि जब कश्मीर की बात आती है तो कहा जाता है कि पाकिस्तान कश्मीर के साथ खड़ा है। फॉरेन मिनिस्टर की बात से मुझे आपको याद आया। इसी तरह से जब फलस्तीन की बात होती है तो कहा जाता है पाकिस्तान फलस्तीन के साथ खड़ा हुआ है। तो जब चाइनीज मुस्लिम्स या उइगर मुस्लिम्स की बात आती है उस वक्त पाकिस्तान लेट क्यों जाता है?
नहीं, खड़ा तब भी रहता है, ऐसी बात नहीं है कि पाकिस्तान खड़ा नहीं रहता उस पर, लेकिन वो थोड़ा झूलता रहता है कि नहीं नहीं एंड कर लो खड़ा रहता है लेकिन झूलता थोड़ा बहुत, देखें इस तरह वो इस तरह। देखिए ये एक हकीकत है।
You see, the useful idiots, the leftists who are idealistically believing in the beauty of Soviet socialist or communist or whatever system, when they get disillusioned, they become the worst enemies. That's why my KGB instructors specifically made the point, never bother with leftists. Forget about these political prostitutes. Aim higher. This was my instruction. Try to get into large circulation, established conservative media. Filthy rich movie makers, intellectuals, so-called academic circles, cynical, egocentric people who can look into your eyes with angelic expression and tell you a lie. These are the most recruitable people who lack moral principles, who are either too greedy or too suffer from self-importance. They feel that they matter a lot. These are the people who KGB wanted very much to recruit.
But to eliminate the others, to execute the others, don't they serve some purpose? Wouldn't they be the ones we rely on?
They serve purpose only at the stage of destabilization of a nation. For example, your leftists in United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize a nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere. The moment they serve their purpose, all the useful idiots are either be executed entirely, all the idealistically minded Marxists, or exiled or put in prisons, like in Cuba. Many former Marxists are in Cuba. In prison. So most of the Indians who were cooperating with the Soviets, especially with our Department of Information of the USSR Embassy, were listed for execution.